Hello everyone again. Hopefully you were just able to watch the little video talking about paint qualities and temperatures of paint, that every paint leans either warm or cool, and that affects the outcome when you're mixing. I'm going to go back to our little workbook, and we are going to go to our color wheel. We're not going to actually paint it right away. We're just going to talk about some of the properties of primaries into secondaries. And we're going to be trying to mix up our paint for the rest of our project, so we don't have to do a ton of like initial mixing as we go. So when we mix, these came in your kit. I don't have them with me, so I printed a picture of them, but you should have 8 little storage cups. And we're going to use these as an inexpensive way to save our paints. Painters, when they build their palettes, they have all kinds of different palettes that they use. Some will have a landscape inspired palette, a portrait palette, a high chroma, jeweled tone transparent palette. People use different types and they find one they love. What we're using though is a color theory set, not so that we can have the exact palette that we want, but so that we can learn about how we can affect colors. And you're going to ask yourself along the way, like, why don't I just go buy the colors that I want? Because it's more fun to know how to make them yourself and then understand the differences between the different kinds so that you can make good choices when you do go spend a lot of money on expensive paint, if you do. Okay, so I had discussed a minute ago in our student grade color theory kit that we have our black and our white. We have the 3 primaries and our secondary. I'm going to set this green aside for a little while. I'm not going to use that. And we're just going to start with these so that we really understand how the color works. I had mentioned in the last video that I don't have the Blick blue that you guys have. And mine is actually much cheaper than this and kind of gross. But I'm going to make it work. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Before we even start painting, I want to build this color wheel with you. It says on here that this color wheel that we use to build harmonies and help us understand how we can create a clear message in our artwork is literally the light spectrum that Sir Isaac Newton figured out when he shined light through a prism wrapped in a circle. So if we remember this acronym from when we were little, Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. That's why often in an art class you say violet instead of purple, because it's the Roy G. Biv help you get there. So I'm going to show you how to lay out the wheel, how you know where it goes. And it's a simple math formula. Primary plus primary equals the secondary. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. So these are our ones. I'm going to always put yellow at the top, because it's the lightest value. And then the blues and the reds, when you look at color wheels online or if you find them in the art store, these shift sides and it doesn't really matter so much. So I'm going to put the blue here and I'm going to put the red here. And then to get your secondary, so your primary is in the middle, your secondary here, you're going to add a 1 plus a 2, or I'm sorry, a 1 plus a 1 to get your 2. So yellow and red make orange. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Yellow plus blue equals green. Blue plus red equals violet. So here's your secondaries. So what these do to help you build your wheel is you follow the triangle point out and put those in place. So we're going to do yellow, red, blue, and this becomes a triadic color scheme. Oops, I wrote that wrong, sorry. Excuse me. That can create a harmony. This is another triadic color scheme that I'm about to show you. You can see that it lays in a triangle on the wheel. And we're going to write out our secondaries. Orange, violet, green. And I'm going to number these. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That leaves our last set that wraps around the wheel. Well, let me show you this though. Roy G. viv. The indigo sits kind of out of our visual spectrum, so it stays out of here and will kind of function in this blue-violet space. So what we're going to try and find are what we call our tertiaries. So I'm going to label these with 3s. And then we add the 1 plus the 2. So the primary goes before the secondary. Yellow, orange, red, orange, red, violet, blue, violet, blue, green, yellow, green. So you can see I put the 1 before the 2. And that's our wheel. But what this doesn't account for is pink or teal or like really beautiful colors that we love, or the colors that we would use to paint nature, human flesh or the ground outside that supported the pretty trees. We need to have those other colors in between. And that was when on the color histories, we had talked about Munsell, who helped us figure out chroma, which is brightness or dullness of a color. What happens when you add value, which is adding white, which is a tint, tone, which is gray, shade, adding black. And that's when we get into some of these other parts of the color mixing demo. Another guy on our histories that we talked about was Goethe, and he talked about that the color wheel divides by warm and cool. So you can see yellow is a warm, green is a cool, red is a warm, violet is a cool. So that's where we would have our warm side of the color wheel and our cool side of the color wheel. And that's really important to help affect your viewer when you're deciding how to build space. If you remember from the color theory video, we also said that warm colors pull forward and cool colors push back. What also happens here is that then it sets up our opposites. Yellow and violet are opposites. Orange and blue are opposites, green and red are opposites, and those sit on the separate sides of the wheel. Green, blue, violet, yellow, orange, red, and those are going to be the most powerful thing that we can use when it comes into color mixing are our complements. I just want to read this Picasso quote because it's fun. They'll sell you thousands of greens, Veronese green and emerald green and cadmium green and any sort of green you like, but that particular green, never. And that is why we're hoping that we can learn how to mix as we go. Okay, so we are going to just concern ourselves with this section, building these secondaries, because these are going to help us. If we can build enough of them at the start, we don't ever need to mix them again for this project, and then you'll have a good practice on how to work it. So I'm just going to set this to the side so we can see it. And I'm going to start by laying out on my palette in corners some yellow, and I laid out about the size of a Hershey Kiss. I kind of always start that way because it's not too much, but it's not too little. There's nothing worse than mixing and not having enough. That is really upsetting. So a fairly decent little chunk. In the last video, I talked about how to save paint, but I'll talk about it again now. I'm going to follow my color wheel and put my blue on the other corner. And I'm going to put my red over here. Okay. And I'm going to take a flat brush, flat synthetic brush, and I'm going to just go ahead and paint out just my primaries while they're clean. So I'll start with my yellow. Switch these. You can tell, because I have the marker under there, that yellow is transparent. And as discussed in the last video, this yellow is leaning more towards, in my mind, a yellow-orange than a yellow-green. This would be more like a lemon yellow, and this is more kind of a warmer kind of yellow, and that affects our mixing. Okay, from our black and white video, if you remember, if I had extra paint in the brush, I'm gonna scoop it out so that I save it. And then when I'm rinsing my brushes, I'm not putting a ton of yucky in my cleaner. Dry off my brush a little bit, and then I'm gonna do my red. These can be as perfect graphically and mechanically as you want, or as gestural and painterly as you want. It's not so much about the remnant, it's more about what you learn as you're mixing. So I'm going to take that out. Not that it's not fun to have your own homemade painted color wheel. Okay, I'm going to scrape out my paint, clean off the yellow. There's a lot of paint still in there. I'm going to switch to my blue. Again, this is a different brand of blue. This blue, not all of them do this, but this one actually tells us that it's semi-opaque. Sometimes they have that kind of information on them, which is helpful. So you're going to see that you're still seeing the text, but this one's going to go away a little bit. See, right away, you can't see as much of that letter. And knowing this stuff will help you with confusion. Or frustration, I should say, when you start painting designs that you're real excited about. You're like, why can't I cover that up? That's why. So that's on there pretty thick, but as I thin it out, the B starts to come through, but I can kind of layer it and make it go away. So that's that semi-opaque. The way that you would make these more opaque is you could add white, but that would also change the value. Okay, so I'm gonna rinse my knife off, clean it off, scoop out my blue. Again, that's quite a bit of paint that was still in there. Okay, so now while we're trying to figure out our secondaries, we're not just trying to paint the wheel, we're gonna try and save some paint. So again, this is where these come in. If you have these, awesome. If you want to mix big pots of it on your palette and save them the way that I did in the previous video where I used a makeshift palette cover with a cookie tray, my palette. I used little Dixie cups just to raise it up, and I used plastic wrap. It's not going to last forever, but it'll help. And then you can squirt it with a little mist before you put the plastic wrap on it to give it a little help. The other thing that I had shown last video was this Masterson Stay Wet palette, and I'll put a link to this. And it's like a little Tupperware box. So if you have like a cake Tupperware box or something like that, you can put them in those too. But to try and get as close to what you guys are up to with what I bought what I put in the kit for you to buy, I'm going to try and save mine in just little plastic cups that I had from a different activity. I'll put plastic wrap over them, and I'm going to put them in Ziploc bags in hopes that it stays for, you know, a week or so. Okay, so let's make our secondaries. I'm going to start with the yellow and the red because it's going to go well. The green is not, and I'm going to explain. Okay, hopefully you remember from the last exercise, last video that I showed, to remember to do the light first with a little bit more of the dark. And let me explain again. So I'm going to grab big hunk of yellow. I'm trying to build my wheel. This is, if I have yellow here, red here, I'm going to put my orange over here. If I take a little bit of red, notice I'm cleaning my knife off again so I'm not contaminating this. If I take a little bit of red and put it in the light, I'm going to affect it really quickly. But if I tried to put a little bit of yellow into a big blob of red, it's not going to do much. So I'm going to get this huge pile of paint that's out of control. So you put your light first and your dark into it. So I'm going to try this little bit and see what happens. The reason that the yellow and the red are going to play nice to make a beautiful Julie orange is because this red is leaning orange. We had talked about in our last video that I had this cool red. Oh, that's not it. Sorry, I did that last time. I have this cooler red called alizarin crimson. And when I mixed it with my blue, it made a super pretty Julie violet. But I didn't show you that this with this would have made a super muddy orange because violet and red are opposite on the color wheel. So this is where it gets complicated. Or I should say fun. So I actually think out of the gate, that was a really pretty orange I made. I like to think about it kind of in ratios. I would say that was like 80% yellow, 20% red. And then that way when you try to go mix something again, you can. I'm going to make it a little bigger. I think I'm going to just use up all that yellow and then try to save it as it goes. I'm going to wipe that off because I got it kind of contaminated with my orange. I'm going to wipe off my palette knife so I don't get the red yucky. Yeah, that's beautiful. Super pretty. So that's a decent amount. Like when I squish that all together, I've got like a pretty good Hershey Kiss worth of paint. I'm going to leave it on my palette for now. I'm going to paint my squares in a second, but then I'm going to save it so that we don't have to go through this exercise again and again and again. You can use this mixing exercise to build the paint that you would use for your painting. Okay. I want to remind you to, or share with you, I guess, for the first time, this paint is so inexpensive. And so when I see people first starting to paint, often they don't use enough of it and it causes great frustration. So I would say let's burn through this $12 kit of paint so you can learn about color and how it reacts together. Okay, so now my oranges, I'm going to go in and do my green and see how it unfolds. So again, here's my blue, here's my yellow. I'm going to put my green here. So I'm building a wheel and I'm working on the outside of the palette. As a reminder again, I'm going to start with the lighter value. Clean my knife off in between. Grab a little bit of the blue and see what happens. So what we have going here, it's actually really pretty. It looks like a real leaf or some actual color in the grocery store produce, or not like a jewel color. So what we have going here is that this yellow is tilting warm. It looks more on a warm side yellow instead of like a lemon lime yellow. And so that's why this is getting a little muddy, because if this is orange and its opposite is blue, or orangish yellow and its opposite is blue, it's going to cancel out and make a little mud. This is where I'm going to take just a second to show you why they put often in a color theory kit a different green. I'm just going to show you a little bit. I might show it on another surface so I don't mess up this palette. And we can use this green later. I just want us to make a straight color theory lesson with what we have for the starter kit. So you can see it's a blue-green, and not until I drag it out can you really see the color of it. And this is called phthalo or phthalocene. So I'm going to see if I can make this greener. I'm going to add a little more blue. I'll never be able to make this. That's that Picasso quote. They'll sell you this green, they'll sell you that green, but never the one you want. So I've got a little greener. And I always mix little increments at a time because it's better to build it slowly than to go too fast and then make it where you don't want it to go. So you can really see the difference in these greens. And this would be something that you would use more like in the undertones in flesh, or if you were painting alla prima, which means all at once, plein air painting outside or something along these lines. And this would be something that would be kind of more playful or more like candy and jeweled toned, a little more pop of color. What can be really fun is when you put those together or layer them. That can be really beautiful. Okay. And in the end, I mentioned this in the last video, you're going to buy the colors of paint that you want and then affect them this way in subtle shifts. But what's cool about this is it's helping us really understand how the paint works. That's what this is for. Or mixing works. I'm going to make this bigger so I don't ever have to do this again. And then I'll save it. Oops, contaminated. Again, I'm kind of trying to make a Hershey's Kiss size blob. Not bad. Okay. Clean my knife. And then now I'm going to try and make my violet, which again, I have my red here, my blue here. So I'm gonna put my violet in between and turn this so it kind of matches a little better. You can see where they go. Okay, so would I put the blue first or the red? Trick question. Red. Since I'm trying to mix and I can get my red later, I'm gonna just use all of this. So that I'm going to try and save these in little cups or your bead jars like these later so we don't ever have to mix these again. Well, for like a week. Okay, so I've got my red. I'm going to use, I think I always think of it kind of like 90-10, 80-20, something like that, like the amount that you're using. So I don't know if you can see that. We'll see what happens. So this is going to be our muddier violet because this red has a real orange tilt to it, not a violet tilt, which has an orange tilt, not a violet tilt. And so orange cancels out blue, and that's why it gets a little muddier. I really try to clean my palette knife as best I can in between so that I'm not contaminating the clean color. From my last experience from this, I remembered that the more blue made it look a little better, a little less maroony. So what we have going on here too that I didn't mention in the last video is something called tinting strength. All paints have a different tinting strength, and you can see it's taking me quite a bit of blue to push this color around. That means this has a low tinting strength. And remember, this is my cheaper, I mean, this is probably like the bottom of the barrel paint that you could buy. I found it in one of the drawers at the studio. It's taking a ton to move that red. So the more expensive your paint, the more control you have over those shifts. It's getting a little prettier. I think I'm going to just scoop up all my blue because I want to save this paint in a cup in a minute. And I think, right, so look at the color out here. It's getting better. I'm just going to use all this. Yeah. So the tinting strength of the blue is weak. The tinting strength of the little bit more expensive red is strong because it was really hard to affect. And while it looks like kind of a super brown in its pile, when you spread it out, it's actually a fairly pretty purple. Okay. So now we have our wheel, our primaries and our secondaries. So let's paint them out. I'm gonna wash my brush good. Let's do our orange. Again, a warm red and a warm yellow made a really jewelly, high chroma, pretty orange. Both of those were transparent, so that would lead me to believe that this orange is also going to be rather transparent. And then I'll follow it out. And it doesn't really matter how thick I put it on. You can still see it. I mean, I could really pile it on there and make it go away, but which is a possibility. Okay, I'm gonna save the paint that's in my brush. While my knife has the orange on it, I'm just gonna scoop this closer together. The more I can keep myself kind of in these little pots that are contained, the longer it'll stay wet. Okay, I'm gonna switch to painting my violet. My water's not getting super yucky very quickly because I keep cleaning out my brush with my knife before I put it in there. Water doesn't matter so much because you're just gonna dump that out and get fresh. But if we were in an oil painting studio and this is expensive mediums, then it does matter that you're not putting straight pigment in there all the time, because then you'd be having to dispose of these chemicals that are challenging and pretty expensive. Okay, let's do our violet. Let's see how it looks on the paper. It'll be pretty, I think. Your violets, if you have the kit, are going to look a little different because you have a different blue. And there's that opacity of the blue showing through again where we lost that Sharpie marker under there. Paint this one. Okay. Clean off my brush and paint our green. It seems like a pretty slow process at the beginning, but I promise once you know how to mix your own colors, painting becomes super fun. And so we shouldn't really think of this as painting. We should think of this as mixing. My painting class that meets on Friday, they spend so much time building their color palettes, and it is so fun because once the color palette's done, then the painting practically paints itself. Okay, I'm gonna do the green. I'm gonna fold my towel so I've got a new space. If I was working with oil, my painting rags I use as long as I can and then I throw away. Or I use like old newspapers to help clean them out and then a rag. But I do wash my acrylic towels in the washing machine. I rinse them out in the sink really good when they're still wet, and then I drop them in the washing machine. But you can also use paper towel. Okay, let's do our green. And as a reminder, we had a warm orangey yellow with the blue, which orange and blue are opposite, so that's why it canceled itself out a little bit. But it really, I mean, it's like a really beautiful color, like an artichoke or spring leaves. It has some transparency, so that's where those brush strokes are going to come in. That's going to bother some of you, that transparency issue, when you start to paint your design, so just paint it thicker. That's nice where it covered it up. Okay, then we'll clean this off. And before we put these paints away, we're gonna really quickly mix up those tertiaries. Okay, so Now we just want to grab just enough to make a yellow green. And at this point, I'm just going to use a brush. I'm just going to use a clean one just to move on. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do yellow first, wipe off my brush, and a little green. I don't know the tinting strength of this yet, so I don't know how aggressive it's going to be, but I know that my blue is pretty wimpy, so I'm thinking it might take a little more. Notice now I'm mixing with my brush because I'm not doing a very big surface and I'm not trying to mix up a whole big hunk of it. That's pretty good. Yeah. And the more yellow, the more transparent. Okay, I'll rinse my brush. And then I'm gonna do the blue-green. I need a little more blue. I'm not gonna do very much now because I know I'm just painting a little section. Green first, blue second. Again, we knew it wasn't very strong in its tinting strength, so I'm gonna use a little bit. Yeah, it didn't move it very far. That's kind of pretty. I'm gonna do a little more. Nice. Okay, I'm gonna rinse it out. Notice again, when I'm doing these tertiaries and I'm only painting a tiny little spot, I have no intention of saving those colors. I'm just mixing with my brush. And that, when you start a big painting palette, when you make an actual painting, that's the idea, is that you have your core colors for your palette, and then you mix little shifts and changes in between. Just like when we did our black and white palette, we had 100, 70, 50, 30, 0, kind of the same. Like you kind of simplify it down to your primaries and your secondaries, or whatever your color palette end up becoming for that project that you're working on. Ooh, look at that, that got really pretty when I put even more blue. I'm gonna do more to make it even bluer. So that real, like it started really brown because the red orange was so prominent. It's actually really beautiful. So you can get a pretty purple that is a little more jewelly. It's just that blue, for me, had to be really strong. Again, you have a different blue, so it may be different. I'll do the red violet. I'm just going to keep this in my palette here. I'm going to do a little bit of red. Oh, I need more because I'll need it for my red orange. Again, the paint's so cheap. Let's really use it while we're trying to understand how to make this happen. Oh, that's kind of pretty. So blue, violet, violet, red, violet. I'm gonna put a little more violet. Nice. Okay, I'm gonna rinse this out. I need to rinse it pretty good because I don't want my blues getting in with my oranges. Okay, so red, orange. I'm gonna do my lighter color first. Red. More orange. A little more red. You can see it didn't shift much. That just proves too that our red is, our orange is super red. Okay, now I'll rinse it out, and then we're gonna do our yellow orange. So I had mentioned before, I'm not so concerned about this. I'm more concerned with what's left on the palette that we'll save so we don't have to do this all again. So I'm gonna do my light value first. looks good. Hopefully you learned a little bit about like how much paint to use, how far it'll go, how to control keeping your paints on the outside of the palette so you can do your subtle mixing in between. There we go. Okay, so let's look at it again. We've got yellow, yellow, orange, orange, red, orange, red, red, violet, violet, blue, violet, blue, blue, green, green, yellow, green, yellow. And so that would be your full working palette. A lot of people don't use that many colors, but since we're practicing color theory, we're going to try and make the whole wheel and then figure out what to do with it. So this is where we're going to save our paints. So this is where our cups would come in. I'm going to try to make the most out of everything that I have left that I can't put back in a tube. So I'm going to take all the blue, blue, violet, red, violet, and red. I'm going to scoop it into my violets so I don't have anything left. And all I want to save are my secondaries because those are so hard to make. And you're like, why can't I just buy secondaries? You totally can, but again, this is about learning how the color works. So that's why we're going through the motions here. And when you go and buy the colors that you love, or even if you're working on a computer, the stuff won't leave your head and it'll really affect the way that you use color. Okay, so you have your little bead jars from the kit, hopefully. I'm going to use these little solo cups. And do my best to save them. Okay, then you guys would just put the lids on your little bead jars. I'm going to wrap mine up, just trying to use stuff that you might have at your house with plastic wrap. I'm going to really seal it as best I can, and then hope that they're still wet when I come back. So that's one way we can do it. The other way we can do it is when I put my palette on a cookie sheet and then put the little cups just to raise them up and then covered it. So what we could do at this point, I didn't show it last time, is where you would mist the palette. I would say like 7 to 10 squirts. So you're not wanting to make it super watery, but just enough to kind of keep it there. Then you would make something raise up and then wrap it with your wrap, and then hopefully that will make it last. We'll see. The bead jars are pretty good, but I'm going to try and mimic your bead jar attempt here. Again, we really just want to save our secondaries because we don't have them in our kit. We have the green, but it's not a great one. The orange was so easy to make, so I'm going to grab all this so I'm not wasting my tube colors. You can see where I put the water in this one, so it's a little runnier from spraying it down. Let's see if I can grab any of this. It's actually really pretty green. And then the hope is that we can finish project 5 with not having to mix secondaries again. And if you have to, hopefully you know how. What's going to be real fun is when we get into the Munsell stuff. The tints, the tones, the shades, and the chromatic grays, and neutralizing with complements. I'll wrap that up in a minute. And then, so I've got my violet, my green, and I'll do my orange. Again, I'm going to try and salvage anything on there that I can. I'll wrap those with my plastic wrap. And then this, you can, if you're on a budget, you can try to wipe it down and use it again, but these are disposable palettes and they're meant to be thrown away. So if you want, you can try and save it. If you want to try and recycle your materials, this should work pretty well next time. Where it's a little junky, it'll be more challenging. Or you can just rip it off and toss it in the trash. So that's kind of our goal, is to figure out using the right amount of paint, the right amount of mixtures, and then how to save it. So that you don't have to keep mixing and mixing and mixing every time. These palettes that I had talked about earlier, I'll take hours setting these up and then use them for months. And then I'm painting, I'm not mixing. And so that's kind of the fun part. Okay, we are going to take a break from this video. And then when we come back, we'll take all the knowledge used here and we're going to really investigate complements. And how they can function. And then we're going to figure out tints, tones, and shades by using our achromatic scale and affecting it with hues. And I think that's it. Okay, we'll see you guys in a minute. Thanks.